Here is a list. A tremor in the right hand that only shows up when the hand is at rest. Handwriting that has quietly shrunk over a year until the signature is half the size it used to be. Trouble sleeping. A metallic taste that never quite leaves. Weight coming off a man who is eating the same food he always ate. A temper that arrives out of nowhere and leaves him ashamed. Shyness, of all things, in a man who was never shy. Memory that drops things, small things, keys and names, and the middle of his own sentences. Read that list to almost anybody, and they will tell you it describes a man who is falling apart. A drinker, maybe. Early Parkinson's. Depression. Stress. That is what 4 different professionals told the man in this story, and every one of them was looking at the right patient and the wrong subject. Because that list does not describe a man, it describes a house. Everything on it is what a particular building was doing to the people who slept inside it, one night at a time, for 14 months. I'm Nathan. What I want you to notice in this one is not the crime, although the crime is something. It is the fact that the person who finally caught it was not a doctor, not a detective, and not a lawyer. It was a 74-year-old man who fixes shoes, who had 12 years of a customer's signatures in a carbon copy ticket book, and who knew exactly what he was looking at because his own father died of it. Abram Sanborn had been going to Kennedy's shoe repair on Bell Street for 12 years, and in all that time, he had never once seen the front door locked during business hours. He noticed it the way he noticed everything now, a half-second late. He had come in with his wife's boots in a paper sack, the good brown ones with the stacked heels she wore to the bank and to her mother's house, and he had put them on the counter and made the joke he always made about how a man could keep a marriage alive on other people's errands. Mac Kennedy had not laughed. Mac Kennedy had looked past him at the sidewalk, come around the end of the counter with the careful sideways gait of a man with 2 bad knees, walked to the door, turned the deadbolt, and flipped the cardboard sign so that open faced the street and closed faced the 2 of them. Then he came back and stood very close and dropped his voice to the register men use in hospitals. "Listen to me," he said. "Go get your kids. Don't sleep in that house. Not tonight. Not ever." Abram was 42 years old. He had spent 10 of those years in the United States Army as a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear specialist, which is a long way of saying he was one of the men they sent into a room after something bad had happened in it, to figure out what the bad thing had been without becoming part of the answer. He had knelt in 3 countries with a handheld detector and a grease pencil, tagging what was on a floor. He knew what it sounded like when a person told the truth about danger, and he knew what it sounded like when a person was performing it, and Mac Kennedy was not performing. "Why?" Abram said. "Because of what I found in the shoe." The shop smelled the way it had smelled for 12 years, of neatsfoot oil and hot rubber and the particular dust that comes off a finishing wheel. There was a radio on the back bench playing a station out of Torrington, with the volume almost all the way down. Behind Kennedy, on the wall, hung the sample board of heel lifts, and under the glass of the counter lay the ticket book, the fat carbon one that Kennedy had used since 1978 because he did not trust computers, and because, as he liked to say, a shoe does not have a serial number, it has an owner. Abram would think about that sentence for the rest of his life. He had come into town that morning for 4 errands, because he was trying to do the small things right. That was the phase he was in. When your wife has started keeping a list of the days you were not yourself, you get very interested in errands. You return the library books. You pick up the boots. You are cheerful in the driveway. You make yourself a man with a routine, because a routine is an argument. And lately, Abram Sanborn found himself losing arguments about his own mind. 14 months earlier, he had been a man who could tap out a dovetail by hand at midnight and hit it. He built furniture in the basement shop of the farmhouse his grandfather had left him, cherry and white oak, and he sold it through a co-op in Kingsley and to 2 designers in Hartford who paid slow but paid. He had a wife, Kinsey. He had a 9-year-old son named Nate who could name every bird on the ridge, and a 6-year-old daughter named Astor who had recently begun signing her drawings with a capital A, the size of a barn. Then things had begun to go wrong in a way with no edges. It started with his hands. Abram noticed it first in the shop, a small dance in the right thumb and forefinger when the hand was resting on his thigh, gone the moment he picked up a chisel. He told himself it was caffeine. Then he began waking at 2 in the morning with his heart going and no dream to blame, and lying there until 4. Then came the taste, a penny under the tongue that mouthwash did not touch. His gums bled when he brushed. He dropped 9 pounds in a season without trying, and Kinsey said it out loud at dinner in front of the kids, that he was disappearing, and it landed wrong, and he snapped at her with a viciousness that shocked the table into silence, and shocked him worst of all. Astor started to cry. He had never in his life made a child cry. That was the first entry on the list Kinsey kept. By spring, he was a man walking on a floor that tilted. He would go down to the shop to fill an order and stand in front of the bench for 10 minutes, trying to remember the sequence of a joint he had cut 1,000 times. He put a chisel through the meat of his left hand and needed 9 stitches, and at the urgent care in Kingsley, the physician's assistant asked him twice, gently, how much he was drinking. He was not drinking at all by then. He had cut it out to see if it helped, and it had not helped. In April, he had what he thought of afterward as the worst hour of his life to that point. He had a piece at the co-op, a small cherry writing desk, and a woman was running her hand along the top of it and saying, kindly, that the drawer bound a little, and Abram heard himself shouting, not arguing, shouting, in a shop full of soap makers and potters, at a customer, about a drawer. He remembered the shape of it more than the words. He remembered walking out to his truck afterward and sitting there with his hands shaking on his knees and thinking, with total clarity, there is something in me that is coming apart. Kinsey was very good about it. That was the thing he kept coming back to later, when he was rebuilding the year in his head. She was so good about it. She made the appointments. She sat in the parking lot afterward and held his hand. She kept the calendar of episodes on her phone, dated, timed, in her tidy little hand, and she read parts of it to the neurologist in Waterbury, while Abram sat in a paper gown and listened to a stranger describe him. She used the word declining. She used the word unsafe once about the basement shop, and the neurologist wrote it down. Her name was Dr. Ansonia Calloway, and she was pleasant and busy, and she ordered an MRI that showed nothing, and a blood panel that showed a slightly low hematocrit, and she landed, after 2 visits, on the phrase, an evolving movement disorder, with a significant mood component, and she started him on something for the anxiety. She never once asked him where he worked, or what the building was made of, or whether anyone else in the house was sick. Somebody else in the house was sick. Nate had headaches. Nate, who had been a boy made mostly of legs and noise, now came home from school and lay on the couch with his forearm over his eyes and said his shins hurt, and the pediatrician said growing pains, and Kinsey said the same, in the same voice, twice. Astor had a rash on her palms, and the soles of her feet that came and went, a hot pink flush, and the skin would peel off in soft sheets, and she would wake in the night sweating and furious and inconsolable, a mild little girl transformed into something that kicked. The pediatrician called it eczema and gave them a cream. Kinsey put the cream on. Kinsey put the cream on, very faithfully, and she also began taking Astor to her mother Trilby's house in town 3 or 4 nights a week. And to anyone watching, that was a woman protecting her daughter's sleep from a father who shouted. That was how the year had gone, and that was the man standing at the counter of a shoe repair shop on a Tuesday in September, holding his wife's brown boots, being told by an old man to go get his children. What did you find? Abram said. Kennedy did not answer right away. He reached under the counter and brought out the ticket book, and he set it down, and he opened it to the front, where the carbons were yellow and soft as cloth. You sign for your work, Kennedy said. Every ticket. 12 years. You want to see something. He turned the pages slowly, the way a man turns pages he has already turned that morning. He had flagged them with slips of leather. There was Abram's name in November of a year when Nate had been a baby, written fast and big, the A a wide confident tent, the loop of the B thrown out and closed. There it was again, 2 years later on a resole, the same. Again, the same. Kennedy's thick finger moved down the years like a man walking a fence line, and the signature stayed the same, stayed the same, stayed the same. And then, 14 months back, it began to change. It got smaller. Not dramatically, not on any one page, but from ticket to ticket, month to month, the letters closed up and shrank toward the line. and the downstrokes acquired a fine sawtooth, a shiver you could not see unless you had 30 signatures of the same man laid out in order and knew what you were looking for. The last one, from July, was half the size of the first. It looked like a small animal had made it. "That is not age," Kennedy said. "I got customers of 80 whose hand is the same as it was at 50. That is a man's hand getting poisoned, and it happens on a slope, and you cannot see it from inside your own arm." "You've been looking at this," Abram said. His voice had gone strange to him. "For how long?" "Since spring. I didn't have the right to say it. A man comes in, drops off boots. What am I going to do? Tell him he's dying?" I told myself, it's not my business. He's got a doctor. He's got a wife. Kennedy's mouth twisted. I told myself that for 4 months. Then this morning, I split that heel. He took the paper sack and drew out one of Kinsey's boots and set it on the counter between them, sole up. "She brought these in Friday. Wanted the heels rebuilt. Said one was loose. Now, that heel is a stacked leather heel. That's 10, 12 lifts glued and nailed. And you rebuild it. You take it down to the seat. So I take it down." He picked up a small screwdriver and used it as a pointer. "And somebody has been in here before me. This is not a repair. This is a cavity. Somebody cut a pocket in the stack with a rotary tool, 1/4 inch deep, 1.5 inches long, and lined it, and put it back together with hot glue. Hot glue, in a shoe. And it has been opened and closed more than once, because the glue is layered and there's dust in the seams." Abram put his palm flat on the counter. The tremor was there. He was aware of it in a distant, clinical way, the way you are aware of weather in another county. "And in the pocket," Kennedy said, "was this." It was a flat plastic badge, about the size of 2 postage stamps, with a foil membrane on one face and a printed grid on the other. There was a serial number. There was a line for a name and a line for a date, both filled in with a fine ballpoint. The name read Halcombe, T. There was a date 14 days old. Along the bottom edge, in small clean type, it said passive diffusive sampler, and under that, mercury vapor, and under that, an address in New Jersey for a laboratory Abram had heard of, because in a previous life he had shipped samples to places like it. He did not say anything for a while. His mind had gone somewhere very quiet and was doing arithmetic. "There's one more thing," Kennedy said, "and then I'm going to sit down, because my legs are not good with this." He upended the boot and rapped the heel once against the counter, over a white sheet of receipt paper, and 3 small beads of something silver rolled out and stopped and sat there, holding the light like they were proud of it. One of them wobbled and split into 2, and the 2 ran apart and touched and became 1 again. Abram looked at that for a long moment. Then he put his hands behind his back like a man in a museum. "Don't touch it," he said. "Don't sweep it. Don't vacuum it. Ever." "I know what it is," Kennedy said. "That's the thing I've been trying to say to you for 5 minutes. I know exactly what it is. My father made hats." He sat down on the stool by the wheel and rubbed his knees. "Danbury," he said. 31 years at the felt. You know what they used to carrot the fur with? Mercuric nitrate. Orange as a pumpkin. Every man on that floor breathed it. They called it the Danbury Shakes, and they thought it was funny. It was a joke around town. The hatters with their hands going. My father's hand started when I was about 9. First his writing got small. My mother used to hold up his letters and say, "Ken, are you writing to me or to a mouse?" Then he got so he wouldn't answer the door. This is a man who ran a floor of 40 men, and by the end he wouldn't answer his own door because people frightened him. He got mean, then he got shy, then he got sick, then he got confused, and then he died at 58, and every single doctor in that town called it something else, because it is the great imitator, and because nobody wanted to say the word out loud in the city that made the hats. He looked up. Then you started coming in here with a hand like his, and your signature started doing what his did, and I told myself I was an old man seeing ghosts. And then Friday, your wife hands me her boot with a mercury badge sewn in the heel. A dosimeter, Abram said. Whatever you call it, it's a dosimeter. You wear it. It sits there and it collects. And at the end of a period, you send it to the lab and they tell you what your average exposure was over that period. Abram heard his own voice doing the flat instructional thing it did under stress, the voice he used to use over a radio. You wear it in the breathing zone, on a collar, on a lapel. You do not wear it in your shoe. Then why is it in her shoe? Because mercury vapor is heavy, Abram said. It's about 7 times the density of air. It pools low. It sits on the floor like water. If you want to know what the worst of a room is, you measure at the floor. He stopped. He heard the rest of the sentence arrive before he said it. And because a badge on a collar is a thing a husband would ask about. 12 years he had known this shop. He put his hand out and took the badge, and Kennedy said sharply, "Gloves," and got him a pair from the dispenser by the cement pot, and Abram put on a pair of nitrile gloves in a shoe repair shop on Bell Street, and picked up a small piece of plastic that told him his wife had been measuring the poison in their house every month for over a year, under her mother's name, and had never once told him the house was poisoned. There is a specific quiet that comes after a thing like that. Abram had felt it exactly twice before, both times overseas, both times in a room he had walked into expecting one thing. It is not shock. Shock is loud. This is the sound of a whole year rebuilding itself into a different shape, every piece sliding into a slot that had been cut for it a long time ago. The calendar of episodes on her phone, the word unsafe, the 3 or 4 nights a week Astor slept at Trilby's, the radon system. Oh, he thought, the radon system. What time is it? He said. 10:15. Can I use your bench, and can you not open that door for anybody for about 15 minutes? Son, Kennedy said, I locked it before you knew there was a problem. Abram called his sister first. Lindley Sanborn was a school nurse at the regional middle school 2 towns over, and she had been the only person in his life who had said out loud, at Easter, in front of everybody, that he did not look like a man with a mood problem. He looked like a man with a poisoning, and had been told to mind her business. He said 11 sentences to her. She said, I'll be at the elementary in 20 minutes, and hung up. He called Kingsley Elementary and told the secretary that his sister was picking up both children today, and that they should not be released to anyone else, including their mother. And he made himself say it slowly and pleasantly, and the secretary said, of course, Mr. Sanborn, and he could hear on her end that she was writing it down and that she was going to remember this call later. Then he stood in a shoe repair shop with a dead phone in his hand and understood that he could not go home, not for clothes, not for his tools, not for the folder of his grandfather's papers in the office. The house was not a house anymore. It was a scene, and it was still running, and the first rule of a scene is you do not walk into it and start touching things. He looked at Kennedy. I need to ask you for something, he said, and you're going to be in this, if you say yes. The old man took his ticket book off the counter and set it in his lap and put both hands on it. I've been in it since spring, he said. I just didn't know what I was in. To understand what had been done to Abram Sanborn, you have to understand what he owned, and to understand that you have to go back to a man named Ives Sanborn, who bought 74 acres on the north shoulder of Bell Ridge in 1954, with money he made rebuilding truck engines, and who spent the next 50 years refusing to sell it. The house was a 1911 farmhouse with a fieldstone foundation, a summer kitchen that had been closed in, and a full basement that Ives had poured a slab in and turned into a machine shop. Behind the house, the land went up through hayfield into hardwood, and about a third of the way up there was a spring. It was not a picturesque spring. It came out of a fold in the ledge, filled a stone box Ives's father had built, and ran off down a channel into a culvert under the town road. In dry Augusts, when half the wells in the low part of Kingsley went to sand, the spring never dropped. 4 houses on the road below had a written right to draw from it, put in place in 1961 by Ives, unpaid, in perpetuity, because 2 of those houses belonged to men he had served with in Korea, and because that was the kind of arithmetic he did. Ives died when Abram was in the army, and he left the land not to a person but to a trust, and the trust is where the trouble lived. The Ives Sanborn Family Trust held the house, the land, and the water. Abram was its beneficiary and its sole trustee. The trust's terms were strange and homemade, and had been drafted by a country lawyer who had listened to an old man very carefully. The property could not be sold, subdivided, or encumbered by the trustee alone. 2 things could unlock it: the trustee's death, or a determination by a court that the trustee was incapacitated, at which point trusteeship passed to the legal guardian of his minor children, who would then hold the power to sell for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Ives had written that clause thinking about a stroke, and about grandchildren who might need money for school. He had written it in 1998, when the idea that anyone would ever want that ridge for anything but hay would have made him laugh. In the winter before everything started, a company called Chapman Ridge Water Partners had offered Abram Sanborn $2,900,000 for the north shoulder of Bell Ridge. They wanted the aquifer. There is a seam of glacial sand and gravel up there sitting on tight bedrock, and the spring is the visible edge of a much bigger thing, and a hydrogeologist had put a number on it that made a bottling operation in western Connecticut suddenly worth doing. They wanted the land, the water rights, and a right-of-way for a pipe down the town road. Their letter was gracious. Their second letter was more gracious. Their third came with a term sheet and a map with a well field drawn on it about 400 feet from the stone box. And Abram had taken that map down to the co-op and shown it around. And then he had written back one paragraph declining. And then he had told the town's water commission that if the town ever wanted the spring, they could have it for $1, and he had said that out loud at a public meeting in March. Kinsey Sanborn had been sitting in the third row when he said it. She had grown up in the flat part of Kingsley, in the house her mother Trilby still lived in, with a brother named Greer and a father who left. Trilby Halcombe cleaned houses for 22 years, including, for a while, the big places out on Chapman Road, and she raised her children on a theory that there are people to whom things are given, and people from whom things are withheld, and the only real question in an American life is which line you end up standing in. She said it often enough that both her children could say it in her voice. Kinsey had met Abram at a wedding in Torrington when he was 2 years out of the army and building a bench in his grandfather's basement for something to do with his hands. She had liked him immediately and, for a long stretch, genuinely. She liked that he was calm. She liked that he did not talk about the war. She liked, in the beginning, that he could not be moved, and the day came when the exact same quality stopped being a virtue and became a wall, and that is the oldest story there is. The wall was the land. In 11 years of marriage they had lived in a beautiful, freezing, expensive old house on 74 acres they could not touch. The roof needed $40,000. The septic needed replacing. She wanted, badly, and not unreasonably, a life that did not involve carrying firewood. And every conversation about money ended at the same closed door. I can't. It's not mine to sell. It's held. Then a company put $2,900,000 on the table, and her husband declined it in a paragraph, and then gave the best part of it away at a town meeting to be applauded by people who had never given her anything. Her brother Greer worked in the Kingsley building department. He was the one who pulled the trust file and read the language and understood, before anyone, what the two doors were. And Dace Rumson was the one who knew what to put in the crawl space. Rumson ran a radon mitigation and air quality company out of a metal building on Route 118. 3 trucks, a good reputation, a man who could talk to a homeowner about picocuries for 20 minutes and leave them feeling both frightened and cared for. He had known Kinsey since high school. He had come out to the farmhouse in the fall, at her request, and tested, and produced a printout with a number just over the action level, and recommended a sub-slab depressurization system with a sealed crawl space. And Abram, who knew perfectly well what radon was and had no reason on God's earth to be suspicious of a fan and a pipe, had said fine, do it, and had written a check for $4,200. Here is what Dace Rumson actually built. He installed a legitimate system: the pipe, the fan on the gable end, the sealed membrane over the crawlspace floor, all of it correct, and all of it inspectable, because the first rule of hiding a thing is to hide it inside something whose paperwork is perfect. Then, in the sealed crawlspace, in the plenum area where the return air for the basement shop passed through, he set a stainless steel hotel pan, the kind a caterer uses, and in it, he put 900 grams of elemental mercury he had bought a bottle at a time from a laboratory surplus dealer in Providence over the course of 2 years. And he set the pan on a reptile heat mat, and he wired the mat to a smart plug on the house wireless. Warm mercury gives off vapor at a rate that would astonish you. Room temperature mercury does it too, slowly. Warm it to 110 degrees under a house, and put a return duct 12 feet away and a furnace fan that comes on all night, and you have built an atmosphere. The plug had a schedule. It ran from 11 at night to 4 in the morning, and again from 8 in the morning until noon, which was when Abram worked in the basement shop. It did not run when the windows were open in July. It did not run on the 2 weekends a year that Kinsey's cousins came from Rhode Island. It could be turned off from a phone at a bank in town. Rumson also did something clever and cruel with the vent. He put a carbon filter on the crawlspace exhaust, so that the one path by which a neighbor's air test or a passing state monitor might have caught something never carried a molecule out. Everything the house made, the house kept. And they staged the story. In February, a mercury thermostat in the upstairs hall was found broken, and Kinsey texted a photograph of it to her mother with the caption, "Another thing." And that photograph had a timestamp, and it would eventually be shown to a judge. In March, a small quantity of mercury was spilled deliberately in the seam of the workshop floorboards under Abram's bench. If anyone ever tested and found what was in that house, there was already a folder that said, "Old building, broken thermostat, a hobbyist who works with salvage, a man who has become erratic and careless, and who, more than once, has been observed shouting." They were not building a murder. That is the part people get wrong when they hear this story. They were building a diagnosis. Abram Sanborn did not go home, and he did not call the police. And both of those decisions were made inside about 90 seconds at the counter of a shoe repair shop, and both of them turned out to be the reason he won. He did not call the police because he had spent 10 years learning what happens when you tell a room full of people that something invisible is in the air. They come, they walk in, they open doors, they turn on lights, they run a fan, they pick things up. Everything he needed was in that crawl space, and the fastest way to lose it was to send 4 county deputies into a house at noon with no instrumentation and no idea what they were standing in. He did not go home because his children were not in it, and because for the first time in 14 months there was a version of events in which he was not the problem, and he did not intend to hand it back by doing something stupid before dinner. What he did was call Terry Coyne. They had been in the same company at Fort Leonard Wood a lifetime ago. 2 kids in a decontamination line, learning to write on plastic with a grease pencil. Coyne had gone the whole way with it, gotten out, gotten a master's, and was now a certified industrial hygienist for a firm in Springfield that got called when a school found something under a stage. Abram told him the story in the parking lot behind the shop, standing next to his truck, in about 4 minutes, because Coyne kept saying, "Okay," and "keep going," and not one single time said, "Are you sure?" At the end of it, Coyne was quiet. "Where are your kids right now?" "With my sister." "Where were they last night?" "In the house." "Nate every night." "Astor maybe half." "How long?" 14 months. "Abram," Coyne said, "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear the whole sentence. You are not going to a police station today. You are going to a hospital today. Not the urgent care in your town. A children's hospital with a toxicology service, tonight, and you are going to ask for urine mercury on all 3 of you. And you are going to say the words, 'Suspected chronic elemental mercury vapor exposure in the home,' to a triage nurse, in that order, or they will look at your kid's rash and send you home with a cream. I'll be at your sister's by 7 with a Jerome and a case of respirators. Do not go in that house." Abram stood in the alley behind Kennedy's shop and looked at the sky over the roofline and did a thing he had not done since he was 23, which was let somebody else pick the next move. By 6 that evening, he was in a bay at a children's hospital in Hartford, holding his daughter's foot in his hand under a good light, and a resident was leaning in with a real expression on her face, and then leaving, and coming back 9 minutes later with an attending. Dr. Niall Cobbler was the pediatric toxicologist on call, a heavy, unhurried man in his 50s with a habit of asking a question, then simply waiting. He looked at the palms of Astor Sanborn's hands, which were pink and dusky and shiny, and at the soles of her feet, which were peeling in soft, translucent sheets, and at her gums, and at the fine hair on her arms standing up in a room that was 74 degrees, while she sweated through her shirt and gripped her father's thumb and told him, in a voice with a wobble in it, that she was not scared, she was mad. "Has anybody used the word acrodynia with you?" Cobbler said. "No. Nobody's going to. Most places. There are pediatricians who go a whole career and never see it. Pink disease. Painful pink hands and feet. Peeling, sweating, photophobia, terrible irritability. Sometimes hypertension. Sometimes loss of muscle tone." He said it gently, to Astor, mostly. "It is a body's reaction to mercury. It used to be teething powders. Now it is almost always a building. Nate was in the next bay saying his shins hurt and that he was fine and could he have his phone. His blood pressure was 128/84. He was 9. They drew everything. Abram made himself say the sentence Coin had given him at every station, to every person, and watched it work each time like a key in a lock. Then he sat in a plastic chair between his 2 children in a corridor in Hartford at 11 o'clock at night and called his wife, because his lawyer would later ask him whether he had, and because he wanted, one time, to hear what she would do with it. Kinsey answered on the second ring, and her voice was frantic in a way that was almost right. "Where are you?" The school said Lindley. "Abram, the school called me. What is happening? The kids are with me. They're safe. They're at Connecticut Children's." A pause of exactly the wrong length. "Why are they at a hospital?" she said. Not what happened. Not are they hurt. Why are they at a hospital? "Because Aster's skin is peeling off her feet," Abram said. "And because I finally asked somebody who knows things." Another pause. "You can't just take them," she said, and her voice had changed register, dropped into something businesslike and prepared. "Abram, listen to me. You are not well. You know you're not well. Please, please tell me where you are, and stay there. And I am going to come. And we are going to—" "Kinsey," he said, "how is your mother's boots holding up?" The silence on the other end of that phone lasted 4 seconds. He counted them, the way he used to count in a stairwell. "I don't know what that means," she said. "Yes, you do," Abram said, and hung up, and turned his phone off, and sat there for a while with his hand over his mouth, because his son was watching him. The lab results came back over the next 30 hours in a sequence he would remember in the order they arrived, like rounds landing. Abram Sanborn, urine mercury, 148 micrograms per liter. Nate Sanborn, 61. Aster Sanborn, 44. The reference range on the report said less than 5. Coin read them off his phone in the hospital cafeteria and set the phone face down and looked at his hands for a second, this man who does this for a living, and said, "Okay," in a voice like a door closing. So that's not ambiguous. 2 other things happened in those 30 hours, and both of them started clocks. The first was that the hospital, as it is required to do, reported a confirmed pediatric heavy metal exposure to the State Department of Public Health, which meant that within a business day or 2, a very polite letter and probably a phone call would go to the address on the children's chart, notifying the residents of the home that an environmental investigation was warranted. That is a good law, and it exists to protect children, and Abram was grateful for it, and it was also, from where he sat, a burning fuse, because that notification would tell the people who built the thing that somebody was coming to look. The second was that at 4:40 the next afternoon, a process server found Abram in the parking garage and handed him a stapled packet with a Superior Court caption on it. It was an emergency ex parte application for temporary sole custody, and attached to it was a second document, a petition for involuntary conservatorship of the person and the estate of Abram Ives Sanborn, on the grounds that he suffered from a progressive neurological and psychiatric condition rendering him unable to manage his affairs, that he had removed 2 minor children from school and taken them to an unknown location while in an altered state, and that he posed an imminent danger to himself and to them. There were 11 exhibits. There was Kinsey's dated calendar of episodes, 14 months of it. There was a letter from Dr. Ansonia Calloway describing an evolving movement disorder with a significant mood component. There was a printed statement from the manager of the co-op about the incident in April. There was a photograph of a broken thermostat with a February timestamp. There was an affidavit from Trilby Halcombe, who wrote that she had taken her granddaughter into her home 3 or 4 nights a week for over a year because the child was frightened of her father. And in the space on the form for the name of the person nominated to serve as conservator, in her small, tidy handwriting, was the name Kinsey Halcombe Sanborn. The hearing was set for 11 days out. Abram read it twice, standing up, in a parking garage, with his son holding the truck keys. Then he laughed, once, which frightened Nate, and he apologized, and crouched down, and explained why in language a 9-year-old could hold. "They just told a courtroom that I'm sick," he said, in writing, with dates. At 20 minutes past 3 the following morning, 2 men in full-face respirators with mercury vapor cartridges walked up the driveway of a farmhouse in Kingsley, Connecticut, carrying a metal case and a roll of blue painter's tape. Abram had a lawyer by then. Noel Tanager had come out of a firm in Waterbury and now practiced alone above a bakery, and he had listened to the whole thing on the phone at 10 at night and asked exactly one question: whose name is on the deed? The house was the trust's, and Abram was the trustee, and there was no order excluding him from the property. And so at 3 in the morning, Abram Sanborn was legally entitled to walk into his own house. Tanager's instruction was simple: photograph everything, touch nothing, and bring a witness who bills by the hour and has letters after his name. The house was dark and smelled like his house. That was the part Coyne warned him about beforehand, and he had not believed until he was standing in the mudroom with his own coat hook in front of him and his daughter's rain boots on the mat. Mercury vapor has no smell at all. It has no color. It does not sting. Nothing in a human being is designed to detect it, which is why it took a hat factory 30 years to notice it was killing its floor. Coyne turned on the analyzer in the kitchen and let it warm up, and they started at the front door and walked the house on a grid, calling numbers out loud so that the recorder in Coyne's chest pocket got them. Front hall, at 4 feet, 2 micrograms per cubic meter. Not nothing. Living room, 4. Upstairs hall by the broken thermostat, at 4 feet, 9. Which was, Coyne said, exactly what a genuinely broken thermostat looks like a few months out, and was the number that folder had been built to explain. Then Nate's bedroom, at the level of a sleeping boy's face, 22. Abram knelt on the floor beside his son's bed with a machine in his hand, telling him that the air his child breathed for 9 hours a night was 5 times the level at which a state would tell a family to leave a building, and he stayed there long enough that Coyne put a hand on his shoulder and said, through the mask, later, work now. Astor's room, 14. The lower level of the bunk in the guest room where Kinsey had been sleeping since April, on the 2nd floor, at the far end of the house, above the summer kitchen, with its separate crawl and its own vent. 3. The basement shop, at the bench where Abram Sanborn stood 8 hours a day, at breathing height, 26. At floor level, 60. And 2 feet from the return duct, where the analyzer began to make a sound Coyne did not like, 91. They put on the harnesses at the crawlspace hatch. Coyne went first because he had done it 800 times, and 30 seconds later his voice came back flat and strange. Abram, do not come in until I read you a number. Read me the number. 4,200. The pan was sitting in a cradle Rumson had built out of scrap 2x4, dead center in the plenum, 12 feet from the return, on a black reptile heat mat with a little green light on the controller. 900 grams of elemental mercury, a bright convex disk of it, so heavy that it did not slosh so much as shrug when the boards moved. Around the pan, on the poly membrane, were dozens of small beads where somebody had been careless refilling it, scattered like spilled solder. The smart plug had a status light. It was on. They photographed all of it. Coyne narrated for the recorder. Date, time, position, instrument serial number, the reading, the calibration certificate in his pocket. Abram taped a scale reference next to the pan and shot the make and model of the plug and the heat mat and the hand-scrawled marker on the cradle where somebody had written 110 with an arrow. And then Abram Sanborn did the hardest thing he did in the entire story, which was leave it there. Every instinct he had, military and paternal, told him to pick that pan up, carry it out into the yard, and call the state. He talked it through with Coyne in the yard at 4 in the morning, with their masks pushed up on their heads and their breath going white. If we take it, Abram said, what do we have? You have a pan of mercury and a hell of a lab report. And who put it there? Coyne said nothing. A contractor installed a legal radon system in that crawl space in October, Abram said. His invoice is on my kitchen counter. If I walk into a courtroom holding this pan, his lawyer says the old man's shop had mercury switches in it for 50 years. His own client stored it. Look at the folder they already built. It's my house. It's my crawl space. It's my grandfather's machine shop. I am the man with the tremor and the shouting incident and the psychiatric letter. He looked at the dark house. It is not enough to prove the house was poisoned. Everything they built for 14 months was designed to make me the most likely author of anything anybody ever found in it. So what do you want? I want their hands on it, Abram said. They spent the next 2 hours doing the only kind of revenge Abram Sanborn was ever interested in, which was preparation. They left the pan exactly as it was, down to the angle of the cradle. They photographed their own exit path. They installed, in the crawl space, a data logging mercury vapor analyzer belonging to Coin's firm, calibrated that week, sealed and time-stamped, sampling every 60 seconds and writing to a card and to a cellular modem. They put a battery trail camera on the far foundation wall, one of the cheap infrared ones people use for deer, aimed at the pan. They put a second camera outside under the eave of the barn, aimed at the crawlspace door and the driveway, and they registered both to Coin's account and not to Abram's. And Tanager wrote a memorandum that same morning recording why. Because the trustee of the property, with the advice of counsel, was preserving evidence of an environmental hazard on premises he owned. They also, at Tanager's insistence, called the state. That is the move most people would not have made, and it is the move that made the whole thing work. At 9 that morning, Noel Tanager filed a notification with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the local health district describing a suspected elemental mercury contamination at the residence, providing the children's confirmed lab values, and requesting an inspection. He also served a copy on the court, attached to his response to the ex parte application, and he served a copy on opposing counsel, a family attorney named Waverly Brightwell. That last one was the fuse. Because now, in writing, on a Thursday, Kinsey Sanborn's own lawyer had a document informing her that the state was coming to the house on Bell Ridge to test the air. They'll take it out, Coin said, when Abram explained what he had asked Tanager to do. The second she reads that, she calls Rumson, and that pan is gone before Monday. Yes, Abram said. Coin looked at him for a while. You've thought about what that is, he said. For them, physically. 900 grams of mercury in a hot pan under a house, in the dark, in a hurry, by two men who have never once put on a respirator to be around it, because to them, it's a jar of silver they've been topping off like a lamp. Abram's voice did not change at all. I've thought about it. I'm not going to help them, and I'm not going to warn them. They can put on a mask. Everything I did tonight, I did in a mask. He was quiet a second. I'm going to be standing on a public road with a camera and a certified industrial hygienist, he said, and they are going to go in there and pick it up with their bare hands, and every second of it is going to be measured to the microgram by an instrument that has a calibration certificate. The state's inspector, a wiry man from the health district named Carl Tavish, came out on Friday and did a walkthrough of the exterior and the perimeter, took 2 ambient readings at the foundation vents, told Abram he could not enter without the occupant present or a warrant, and scheduled the full interior inspection for the following Wednesday at 9 in the morning, and put it in writing to both parties. 5 days. They have 5 days, Tanager said, on the phone, in a voice with something in it. Do you know what you've just built? A clock, Abram said. He hung up and drove back to the motel on Route 202, where his sister was doing multiplication tables with a 9-year-old on a bedspread, and his daughter, whose feet had been wrapped in cool gauze by a nurse who knew what she was looking at, was asleep with her hands open on the pillow. They came on Sunday night, which Abram had guessed, because Sunday night is when a contractor's truck on a back road is invisible. At 11:52, the barn camera picked up a white pickup with a ladder rack coming up the drive with its headlights off, and a second vehicle behind it, a gray sedan that stopped at the bottom near the road and sat there with its parking lights on. 2 men got out of the truck. One was Dace Rumson, the other was Greer Halcombe, in a hooded sweatshirt, carrying a shop vacuum by the handle. Abram watched it on a phone in a motel room 40 minutes away with Terry Coyne sitting on the other bed and Noel Tanager on speaker, and none of them said anything for a long time. They were in there for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Neither man wore a respirator. Rumson had a paper dust mask pushed down under his chin for part of it. They ran a shop light on a cord. They opened the hatch and left it open, which meant the house above them was being fed everything they stirred up, which is why Abram had made certain, twice, that nobody he loved was in that building. The logger in the crawl space wrote a number every 60 seconds, and the numbers went up like a tide. At 12:14, when they first disturbed the membrane, 11,000 micrograms per cubic meter. At 12:31, when Rumson tried to pour 900 grams of liquid metal from a hotel pan into a plastic bucket in the dark on his knees, and lost some of it, 12,800. At 12:52, Greer Halcombe turned on the shop vacuum. There is no faster way to make a small mercury spill into a catastrophe than to vacuum it. The metal is torn into a fine mist by the impeller, warmed by the motor, and blown out the exhaust port at high velocity, and a filter does absolutely nothing, and the vacuum itself becomes a fogger that will keep emitting for months. It is the first thing you are told never to do. It is on the wall of every hazmat classroom in the country. They did it because they were frightened, and because they had never in their lives been taught to be frightened of the right thing. The logger recorded 21,400 micrograms per cubic meter, sustained, for over an hour. That is a level at which the state of Connecticut evacuates a school and a person begins to feel it in a single shift. At 3:31, the two of them came out, carrying a bucket, the pan, the heat mat, and the vacuum, and they loaded all of it into the bed of the truck with the shop light still burning, and Rumson stood in the driveway for a long time with his hands on his knees, and then he was sick in the grass, and the barn camera got that too, in infrared, in perfect focus, at 3:34 in the morning. The gray sedan at the bottom of the drive left first. It was registered to Trilby Halcombe. Her daughter was driving it. On Wednesday at 9 in the morning, Carl Tavish walked into the house on Bell Ridge with a warrant that had become unnecessary, an instrument, and a lot of experience, and he did not get past the mudroom before he stopped and looked at the readout and stepped back outside and made a phone call. Because they had opened the hatch, and because they had run a vacuum for 40 minutes, and because Rumson had spilled roughly 140 grams into the seams of a plywood subfloor while trying to bail it in the dark, the house on Bell Ridge, emptied of its device, was now more contaminated than it had ever been while the device was in it. The whole house reading at 4 feet was 210 micrograms per cubic meter. Rumson's shop on Route 118 read 4,000. His truck cab, which he had driven for 3 days with the windows up and the heat on, read 1,100. His crew of 4, none of whom had been within a mile of the farmhouse, had been sitting in a break room next to a contaminated vacuum for 72 hours. By Thursday, the state had condemned the metal building, tented the trucks, and set up a decontamination line in a parking lot on Route 118, and a plain-spoken woman from the health district was standing in front of 6 men explaining what a urine test was going to tell them. Dace Rumson's own urine mercury came back at 390 micrograms per liter. Greer Halcombe's came back at 212. Both of them were admitted. Both of them received chelation therapy, which is a course of treatment that makes a grown man wish he had been born into any other week. Rumson would keep a tremor in his left hand. He was 39. The hearing on the conservatorship petition of Abram Sanborn went forward as scheduled, because Noel Tanager asked the court to let it go forward. Kinsey came in with her hair up and her hands folded, and Waverly Brightwell stood and said that in light of certain developments her client wished to withdraw the ex parte application without prejudice, and Tanager said, pleasantly, that the respondent would prefer the court hear it, since the petition alleged on its face that he was incapacitated, and he would very much like a finding on that. Then he put on his case. He did not start with the mercury. He started with a 74-year-old cobbler in a pressed shirt who had never been in a courtroom in his life, who was sworn, and who was asked what he did for a living, and who said, "I fix shoes, 51 years. Tanager had photographed 31 carbon tickets and had them enlarged, and he put them up on the screen in the order Mac Canady had kept them, 12 years of one man's signature, and he walked the courtroom down the fence line the way Canady had walked Abram down it in the shop. Same, 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 same. Then the slope. Mr. Canady, when does the change begin? 14 months back. October, the year before last. Right after the boots she brought in for new heels the first time. And what did your father do for a living? Brightwell objected. She was overruled. And a man with 2 bad knees told a Superior Court judge about a hat factory in Danbury, and about a letter written to a mouse, and about a floor boss who stopped answering his own door, and about how every doctor in that town called it something else, and there was not a sound in that room, and Kinsey Sanborn looked at the table in front of her for the entire 11 minutes. Then came Dr. Niall Cabell on acrodenia and on 2 children's numbers. Then Terry Coyne with a calibration certificate and a spreadsheet and a chart of a crawl space on a Sunday night that ran off the top of the page. Then the smart plug schedule, subpoenaed from the manufacturer, 14 months of a heat mat, coming on at 11 at night and going off at 4 in the morning, and going off entirely on the 2 weekends Kinsey's cousins visited from Rhode Island. And then Tanager introduced the exhibit that ended it. The laboratory in New Jersey, on a subpoena, produced its records for the account that had submitted a monthly passive mercury vapor dosimeter, badge after badge, 14 of them, billed to a credit card in the name of Kinsey Sanborn and submitted under the name T. Halcomb, with the sampling location written by hand in the same small, tidy handwriting as the calendar of episodes. 14 months of one woman measuring, with laboratory precision, exactly how much poison she personally was breathing in the house where her 9-year-old son slept every single night. The judge asked for the badge results to be read into the record. Her own average exposure, in the room above the summer kitchen at the far end of the house, had never once exceeded 4 micrograms per cubic meter. She knew the number. She had been watching the number. She had been watching her own number the entire time. The court denied the petition, made a finding on the record that the respondent was not incapacitated and never had been, granted him emergency sole custody, and referred the entire file to the state's attorney by close of business. Kinsey Halcomb Sanborn was arrested 9 days later and charged with assault in the first degree, 3 counts of risk of injury to a minor, conspiracy, and attempted larceny. Dace Rumson was charged from a hospital bed. Greer Halcomb, who was the weakest link in the chain and had always been, gave a statement within 48 hours that filled in the parts nobody could have proven, including the 2 years of buying mercury a bottle at a time and the afternoon in the county building department when he first read a trust document and understood what the word incapacitated was worth. Trilby Halcomb was charged as an accessory. She told a detective named Randy Odom that she had only ever wanted her daughter to stand in the other line. Dr. Ansonia Calloway was not charged with anything. She had simply never asked. She wrote Abram a letter, which he did not answer for a long time and then did, and she now gives a talk to residents twice a year that begins with a list of symptoms and ends with the sentence, "Ask what the patient's house is made of." And Chapman Ridge Water Partners never got their well field, because 6 weeks after the hearing, Abram Sanborn stood up at a town meeting in Kingsley, in the same room where he had said it the first time, and finished what his grandfather started. He placed a permanent conservation easement on the north shoulder of Bell Ridge and deeded the spring and its recharge area to the town's water district for $1, with a covenant that it can never be bottled, sold, or metered to anybody who did not have a right to it in 1961. It made the land worth almost nothing on an open market. That was the point. There is no version of the future in which anybody ever again has a reason to make Abram Sanborn crazy. The house came down to the studs. The state supervised the remediation. The subfloor and the joists went into drums, and the insurance fight took 11 months, and he won that too. And today there is a smaller, warmer, boring house on that foundation, with no crawl space at all, and a heat pump and a monitor on the wall of every bedroom. Nate's numbers came down over a year, and his blood pressure came down with them. He is 13 now, and he is made mostly of legs and noise again. Astor's hands healed. She is 8, and she still signs everything with a capital A the size of a barn. And last spring she asked her father, out of nowhere, in the truck, whether the shoeman was still alive. He is. He is 76, and he still will not use a computer. And on a Tuesday last October, Abram Sanborn walked into a shop on Bell Street that smelled of neat's foot oil and hot rubber, and put a pair of his son's cleats on the counter, and picked up the pen on its little chain, and signed his name. Mac Kennedy turned the ticket around and looked at it for a second longer than he needed to. Then he tore off the carbon and handed it across, and said, "That's the one I wanted to see. I want to end on the cobbler, because he is the part of this that keeps me up. Think about who actually sees you. The people who live with you see you every day, which sounds like an advantage, and is the opposite of one, because change that happens on a slope is invisible to anyone standing on the slope. Your wife, your kids, your best friend, they get the new you delivered in daily increments too small to notice, and by the time they look up, the slow version of you is just what you are like now. The people who catch it are the ones who see you at intervals, the barber, twice a year, the dentist, the mechanic who has your handwriting on 8 work orders, the pharmacist, the woman at the bank who has watched you sign a slip since 2011. A cobbler with a carbon ticket book, which is the only reason a man in Connecticut is not in a conservatorship right now, with 2 poisoned children and a court order keeping him away from them. So here is what I would actually do with this story, and it is not glamorous. Keep something that records you at intervals. Sign a book. Keep a paper journal with dates in it. Get your own handwriting on file somewhere that is not your house. And when a person who sees you 4 times a year says, carefully, that you seem different, do not do what almost everybody does, which is explain it away in the parking lot. Ask them the second question. What is different? Since when? And if you are ever the one who notices, be Mac Kennedy. Lock the door. Say the whole sentence out loud. You are allowed to be wrong, and it costs you nothing, and the other way around costs a family 14 months.